Welcome, everyone, to another episode of CPAC Live. We have a great show for you today. We're going to be joined in just a few minutes by leader Kevin McCarthy, who leads the great Republican conference in the House of Representatives and is on a quest to take back the majority in the House of Representatives from this person called Nancy Pelosi. You might have heard of her. She's now for taking down all the statues of Christopher Columbus, an amazing thing to see. And we're also going to be joined by the FCC chairman, Ajit for a great interview that we were able to conduct yesterday. But first, it is our pleasure to give you a surprise. Women on the bus, conservative women on the bus, women for Trump. Matt Schlapp, who are you there with?
Hi, baby. I miss you terribly.
I miss you too.
Yes, I'm here with my sisters, Katrina Pearson.
Hi, Katrina.
Hi, Pam Bondi and Penny Nance.
Hi, guys.
And I have one of your daughters with us, Alyssa, who's been a great help throughout this whole process. So we're having a great time talking about statues. We just stopped at a memorial, Abraham Lincoln statue. And really, it was just spectacular to be there. But we're going to head out to the MAGA Moms meetup today and hang out with the wonderful women of Wisconsin.
That's awesome. And I saw yesterday you actually stopped off at a grotto, too. Remember, they're not just going after statues of Abraham Lincoln. They actually think all the saints at the church should be ripped down.
Right. Well, yeah. Pam Bondi can tell you about the holy water experience.
Mercy all of us. We all were blessed by your wife with holy water. So it's beautiful. And the church on Holy Hill was beautiful. And all the incredible statues there that are still standing in Wisconsin.
Hey, Pam, are we going to win Florida?
We're going to win Florida, and I'm headed from here to Jacksonville tomorrow morning. We're hosting a small event with the VP and very excited to get the convention. I'm on the host committee, and we're going to have a great in Jacksonville, seeing everybody there. And we're going to win Florida.
Hey, Penny, were you pretty excited that the Supreme Court said that the war on nuns should stop, and if you don't want to pay for abortions and contraception, you shouldn't have to?
The Little Sisters of the Poor. I mean, you got to know you're desperate when you get sued by a bunch of sweet nuns who care about poverty and celibacy, yet they have to pay for other people's abortions. Really? So, but what the court said is it really is up to the administration in charge. So if Joe Biden were elected, it's not going to happen. But if he were, the Little Sisters of the Poor would be back in court again. So this is essential that we support them and we support this president who is pro-life and also pro-religious freedom.
Hey, Katrina, we saw yesterday that the CEO of Goya Foods had the audacity to go to the White House and speak up in support of President Trump and his agenda. And now the cancel culture is saying we have to boycott Goya products. Are you used yet to being called a racist?
No, Matt, not at all. But look, the cancel culture lost me when they canceled my favorite maple syrup.
Right.
So look, we are on the road now, and we're back. The Trump campaign is back out on the road, and everyone will this. Go to donaldjtrump.com to find out all of our events because coalitions are about to be unleashed. Our field offices in minority communities, Hispanic and Black, they are opening, and we are taking to the road. We're planning hundreds of events over the next few months, so come out and see us.
And we're going to be on the road as CPAC as well. We're starting in Nevada. We're going to be moving on to Wisconsin. We're going to be in almost every battleground state. We might need to borrow that bus. Is that okay, Mercy?
Very pink.
It is very.
That's okay. We can handle it. Hey, Women for Trump, thanks so much for what you're doing. Keep up the great work in Wisconsin, and thanks for joining us on CPAC Live. We're going to next be joined by Kevin McCarthy, the great leader of the Republican conference. We'll be right back at you.
Love you, baby.
Love you too. Bye, guys. Wow, how great to hear from the Women for Trump on that big pink bus heading around Wisconsin, stopping at every statue they can possibly stop on. to go venerate and appreciate our great founders, the great saints of the church, even the Blessed Virgin Mary. Can you believe that? They want to take down statues of Jesus's mother. We are in crazy times. And now we're joined by the great Republican leader in the House of Representatives, Kevin McCarthy, who has an 86% ACU lifetime score, and we're really tough judges. Leader McCarthy, thanks for being with us today.
Oh, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You know, I'm very worried because the Constitution actually prescribes the fact that we have to have a presidential election every 4 years. Somehow the Democrats are trying to find every excuse imaginable to almost basically cancel the election, cancel in-person voting. Tell us about what's happening in your quest, not only to get Donald Trump reelected, but to take that gavel away from Nancy Pelosi.
Well, that's what we have to do. And you're correct with the Democrats. The Democrats don't want to work. Nancy Pelosi has changed history. And when you think about Congress through yellow fever, through the Civil War, through World War I, II, 9/11, Congress is essential. We always met. But not now. They have this shadow voting where Democrats don't want to come to work, don't want to make what really we believe make this country stronger. And what we're finding is the Democrats are doing that on the campaign as well. They don't want Joe Biden out of the basement, because if Joe Biden comes out of the basement, one, he'll have to carry on a complete sentence. Two, we'll have to find out whether he has a policy or not. And we know he cannot compete with President Trump, and President Trump will win overwhelmingly. The good news about this, not only are we in the path for the president winning, but the worst thing that could happen is the president wins re-election and Nancy Pelosi is still speaker. When I took over as minority leader, it was taking 19 seats to win the majority. You know what it is now? It's just 17 in a year and a half. We got a Democrat to re-register as a Republican. And that happens sometimes, but never from the majority to the minority. So that should tell you a lot. And more importantly, I know during this COVID, people couldn't follow politics, but something big happened. In California, we had not flipped a seat from Democrat to Republican in 22 years. We had a special election because of a Democrat doing something stupid. The Democrats had won this seat by 9 points. Hillary Clinton had carried it by a majority. And they picked their candidate, the state assemblywoman. We went out, recruited, got Mike Garcia, first generation American, graduated from the local high school, got nominated to the Naval Academy, graduated in the top 3%, flew jets, and went back and was working in the community after he served his country. Never ran before. And in the middle of this race, COVID hits and they changed the election rules. So it's going to be an all-mail ballot. You know what happened? We took a seat that we had lost by 9 points and won it by 9 points.
No, that's right.
It was a wake-up call for Democrats. There are 42 other seats that Democrats hold right now that are better for Republicans to win than Mike Garcia's.
And how many of these seats across the country did Donald Trump, how many of these districts did Donald Trump win in 2016? 30
of the seats that the Democrats sit in, and we only need 17, Donald Trump won. He's going to win those and more.
And in many of these areas, Leader McCarthy, because of the way the issue set is coming down, you have Joe Biden saying he's going to raise by a third all corporate taxes, right back up to make America non-competitive with the globe. He's talking about defunding police and de-arming police, and he's talking about making fossil fuels essentially illegal. Pretty radical stuff.
Very radical. He has actually surrendered to the socialists. And remember, he's been here 50 years. Why do we think he's going to change? I mean, he's bringing Congresswoman Omar, into his wing. He brought Bernie Sanders, signed this unity pact, but he just surrendered to them. I mean, think about it. Congresswoman Omar wants to dismantle America. She was born in a foreign country, lived in a refugee camp, and what did America do in its greatness? Open its arms to her family and had her immigrate into America. And in her first generation, she becomes a U.S. Congresswoman. She wants to dismantle America? No, we should duplicate America. That's what those people rose up in Tiananmen Square, or the shipyard workers in Poland are tearing down the Berlin Wall. Because America is more than a country. America is an idea that our founders understood. But you watch what the mob mentality and what these Democrats are doing. Think for one moment. In 2015, I stopped with Pope Francis and prayed in front of St. Sarah's statue. St. Sarah's statue got torn down in San Francisco in Nancy Pelosi's district, and she has said nothing. As a strong Catholic, she said nothing. In her Italian heritage, where she grew up in Baltimore, they just knocked down Christopher Columbus. And you know what her answer was? People do what they're going to do. What is Joe Biden's answer to all this? He says nothing but says we need to defund the police. That does not make us safer. It actually concerns me where the world's going. And if we got to rebuild this economy, we know what Joe Biden did with our economy. We also know what President Trump did. The biggest, strongest economy in American history. Didn't matter what gender, what color of skin you were better off with President Trump, and he's going to rebuild, renew, and restore America.
Doesn't it all start with this whole question about whether or not schools can safely reopen? If we're trying to follow science and we're going to follow who's at risk and who's not, kids are probably the safest component of our population. Yet you have these left-wing teachers union heads and these Trump-hating blue state Democrat socialist governors doing everything they can to actually harm kids in order to get to their political aim of stopping Trump.
Yeah, your focus should be on the children, their safety and their education. We can do this in a safe manner. And we can take all what we're going through. And this is why Congress should actually meet. Because I'll tell you, as a parent, you're more than a parent today. You're now the teacher, the coach, the tutor. And how can we get business back opened up if schools or child cares are not open? I mean, this is what we need to have happen. And we can do it in a safe manner. But could you imagine to say for a whole generation you're not going to teach them? I mean, education is the great equalizer. What are we doing to our inner city schools? What are we doing to the rural communities and others? What are we doing as a nation for the next generation to be able to prosper and be stronger than we are today if they're not going to be educated? Simply for a political decision, I think that's wrong.
And I haven't talked to one of our kids. We have 5. I haven't talked to one of our kids' teachers that express anything other than concern that the schools won't open up in a regular fashion. I actually think the teachers are with us. I think it's the politicized union folks and the administrators that are playing politics. And it's ironic, Leader McCarthy, it seems like the only kind of homeschooling the Democrats like is when they can mandate it on all of us.
Exactly. They're opposed to it at any other time. And the uniqueness here, too, is if we're getting the schools back open, we can do it in the right locations. If there's a hotspot, you can calm within there. But the whole country is not the same. There's 50 different states in this country. There's places that COVID is not a part of that we could be educating our students instead of denying them the right to education.
You know, as we let you get back to your busy schedule, give us an update of what's going on in Congress. We know that Nancy Pelosi is using this, what I consider illegal proxy voting, to try to jam things through. But the most important thing to all of Americans is not just our health and our safety, but it's also getting this economy revving again. Do you think that what the Trump administration has been doing with making sure that we stabilize all these small businesses that were essentially, and large businesses that were forced to close, do you feel optimistic that the economy is coming raring back?
Well, if you just look back to the last 2 months of the jobs report, we've never created those many jobs in 2 months in the history of the world, of America. Never been able to do it. More than 7 million jobs. And we were going to keep growing with that to rebuild it. But the real question is those small businesses that employ so many people, they were hurt when government shut down. But the Trump administration, working with the Republicans in the House, we created the PPP program that gave them the bridge money and the grant to sustain themselves. But while we were doing that, remember Nancy Pelosi came in and stopped the bill, so businesses were hurt. When that program was so popular and we had used all the money we need to replenish it, we set it way in advance. She held it up. Remember, she got by her special ice cream and said no in her refrigerator. And how many more businesses and how many more people got laid off by that? In just those 2 instances. Then when Nancy went out to write a bill, she just put out $3 trillion. But this will tell you who understands jobs better than the other. In the Democrats' $3 trillion bill, the largest bill ever written in Congress, it mentioned cannabis more than it ever mentioned jobs. So what were they really focused upon? It wasn't about getting the economy back working. It was all their pet projects, from changing the voting, from changing all the aspects of this shadow voting that is proxy inside Congress. That's the history and the future they want. We want to rebuild, restore, and renew this country. take the traditions of the past and apply it to a changing future so the next century is again America's century.
Well, Kevin McCarthy, we very much appreciate your singular focus on making sure that the voters across this country understand what's at stake with this question of a House majority. If Nancy Pelosi has that gavel, I'm telling you, you can take it to the bank, even if the bank is closed, that she is going to impeach the president again for any reason under the sun. It's why we got to hold that majority in the Senate, and it's critical that we go back to the people's work instead of these, these coups that Democrats seem obsessed with.
Yeah, if you keep Nancy Pelosi as Speaker, that means Adam Schiff's in charge of Intel, which he will not put his focus on China and what China is doing and bringing our supply chain back. They'll only try to impeach the president with more lies.
Yeah, and could you try to beat Adam Schiff and Jerry Nadler? I know those are tough districts, but why don't we just give it a little bit of a shot, okay?
We're gonna compete in all of them, and
That's
you're
awesome.
gonna be so proud of the candidates we have. It's amazing.
Well, we're happy to work alongside you in this important goal of getting the economy moving. We thanks for your time today, and we're glad that you're at work. There's some serious things to get done in this country. Keep working.
All right, thank you, and keep doing your job. We need you.
All right, thank you, Leader McCarthy. And we're going to now move right to an interview that I was able to conduct yesterday with the great chairman of the FCC, Ajit Pai. Listen to this great interview. We're so lucky to have a great conservative, and may I say, great conservative Kansan, as the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, Ajit Pai. Chairman Pai, thanks for being with us at CPAC Live.
Hey, it's so great to be with you. Always a pleasure to see a fellow Kansan.
We're not in Kansas anymore, unfortunately. And one of the ways in which we're not in Kansas is these rather serious threats that the Trump administration is trying to navigate vis-a-vis China's determination to dominate the globe in every conceivable way, including in telecommunications. Where are we on this 5G race?
A good question. So 5G is the next generation of wireless connectivity. I've made it a priority, as has the entire administration, to make sure that America leads the way in the development and deployment of these new technologies, not just because it means more jobs and more economic growth, more innovation here in the US, but also because we are in a geopolitical battle, if you will, with the Chinese Communist Party. China sees the advantage that America had with respect to 4G LTE, and they want to seize that advantage in 5G and other technologies. And so we're pushing ahead very far, very fast in order to make sure that all of that innovation happens on our shores. And that's not a given. Unfortunately, China and other countries are very determined as well. They've cleared out a lot of the roadblocks. They're investing a lot of money. And so we need to make sure that the FCC, the entire US government, puts the building blocks in place for innovators and entrepreneurs to succeed here.
Are we at a disadvantage in our diffuse government? We believe in states' rights and localities. We're not communist. We're not centralized. Not every decision comes out of Washington, D.C., although it seems like the other side seems to want everything to come out of Washington, D.C. Does China have the advantage because they're so centralized, they're totalitarian, they're communist? Is it inevitable that they'll beat us because of this idea that they can just press go and make it happen?
I don't think so. I do believe in America in its spirit of innovation, and I think that is ultimately our ace card. But I will say that there are advantages that the Chinese Communist Party can have, and the first and foremost one is the one you pointed out. They can simply dictate that infrastructure deployment policies are going to be X, and it shall be X everywhere from Beijing all the way to Tibet. And unlike here, where we have a federal system, of course, we've got federal regulations, state regulations, local regulations, and even tribal regulations. There, they can have a one-size-fits-all regulatory model. And although we don't like the democratic aspects or the non-democratic aspects of that, it does give a lot more certainty. There's a lot less litigation and uncertainty over how the rules are going to be applied. And so here in the United States, for example, with 5G, it's going to involve the deployment of not just the big cell towers, the 200-foot towers that most people know, but small cells, very small infrastructure that's relatively inconspicuous, can fit on the side of an office building and the like, and provide that connectivity. But we need to make sure that if you're deploying a small cell, you don't have to jump through those same federal, state, local, and tribal hoops that you would for big cells. We need to make sure that streamlining happens in order to give companies here just as strong an incentive to invest as they would have in China. And that's one of the concerns I would have. But I would say the other one is also that in the United States, federal agencies hold the bulk of the very usable spectrum for 5G. The Department of Defense, Department of Transportation, and others have a lot of that spectrum. It's very difficult for the FCC in many cases to make that spectrum available for 5G innovators on the commercial side. In China, of course, the sky's the limit. It's much more, it's easy for a centralized planner to simply say, okay, we're going to make this block of spectrum available. So those are two advantages China does have. But at the end of the day, I do think that America's determination and our spirit of entrepreneurship will carry us forward.
So when it comes to these questions of trying to push through, whether it's making sure that we can implement these new 5G policies, it's been the president's approach, the Trump administration's approach, you as an appointee of President Trump, to revisit our relationship and professional relationship with the communist government in China. And the FCC took a dramatic step in the last few days and weeks when it comes to these Chinese Communist Party controlled entities, which they try to market to the world as private corporations, corporations like Huawei and ZTE. Tell our CPAC community why that action was so important.
It's so important because of the threat that we face. And let us be clear about this. The Chinese Communist Party is a uniquely malign force in the world, as well as against its own citizens. And one of the ways they exert this malign force is through its national intelligence law. China has a law, the national intelligence law, that requires any company subject to its jurisdiction to comply with requests from the Chinese intelligence services. Companies like Huawei and ZTE, for example. Now, the problem is that Huawei and ZTE don't operate just within China. They're providing network equipment and services everywhere in the world, including here in the United States, which I'll get to in a second. And so one of the things that we looked at about a year ago and finalized just last week, as you pointed out, was whether or not Huawei and ZTE in particular should be the recipients of funds through our Universal Service Fund program. This is the Universal Service Fund is an $8 billion annual fund that the FCC oversees. It distributes money to US-based telecom carriers to build out broadband and other advanced services. And one of the things I said was, well, it doesn't make any sense for us to distribute this money and then for the US telecom carriers to spend it on untrustworthy Chinese equipment manufacturers. And that's one of the things we looked at. We looked at all the evidence from the intelligence community, the national security agencies. We even heard from Huawei and ZTE themselves. And at the end, what we concluded last week was that these companies pose too big a risk when they're putting this network equipment in that could monitor us, surveil us, insert malware, facilitate the theft of intellectual property. These are too big of a risk, risks for us to take. And so we're prohibiting the use of that Universal Service Fund money from being spent on Huawei and ZTE. They now have a chance to challenge that. This is due process that is here in the United States, which they don't, of course, observe in communist China.
Of course.
It's kind of ironic. But at the end of the day, my bottom line is that I cannot and will not oversee a system in which taxpayer funds are being used to compromise America's national security. This is not just a question of, spending a few bucks on a router and forgetting about it. This is going to underlie everything from our healthcare system to transportation, manufacturing to agriculture. We cannot take a risk and hope for the best here.
Because if companies that are basically controlled by the Chinese Communist Party get into the backbone of 5G, we have legitimate security, national security concerns on how much they can disrupt our society.
Absolutely right. And to me, at least, the risk that these companies would comply with requests from Beijing is just too high. I mean, look, just over the last week or two, the Chinese Communist Party has been very aggressive in asserting extraterritorial, that means beyond China's borders, extraterritorial jurisdiction on what people say and what they even think. We've seen it over the last couple of months, censoring WeChat users in Canada from talking about the anti-democratic forces in Hong Kong. Just today, actually, I saw a clip online about a UK Minister of Parliament asking Huawei executives in the UK, you say you're free to express your opinion? And the answer was yes. And the minister asked him, well, okay, what do you think of the security law that just passed? And the guy suddenly says, well, I'm just a telecom executive. I don't have an opinion. I mean, it's pretty clear that the Chinese Communist Party wants to censor a broad range of views. And when it comes to something as sensitive as telecom equipment in the United States that might be near sensitive military installations or critical infrastructure facilities. Do you really think the Chinese Communist Party is not going to ask Huawei and CPE, hey, we want to see what's going on in these networks. We want to be able to track certain individuals, especially government officials or corporate executives. That's something that we just cannot risk in this country.
So we have these other social media platforms, software platforms that seem to once again have a cozy investment relationship with the Chinese party in the Chinese Communist Party. It seems like Americans should be awfully careful when they start bringing those platforms into their professional lives, into their personal lives, because as you said, they can easily be manipulated.
Absolutely right. And I understand that some of these platforms might be very popular, things like TikTok, for example, and that young people in particular will tend to use a platform because it's popular and available. They don't think about the security aspects of it. But one of the things that I know Secretary Pompeo has talked about is whether or not these platforms are indeed secure. The SEC doesn't necessarily have jurisdiction over these types of issues. That might be a different agency. But what I will say is it's notable that the government of India, one of the largest market outside of China, has already taken interim action. About a week ago, they issued an order banning TikTok and 58 other Chinese-based mobile applications from the country because, as they found, the government of India found, they compromised the security of the Indian nation. They were obviously taking Indian consumers' data and potentially misusing it, a bunch of other threats. And so I think this is a growing concern, not just here in the United States, but around the world. Forward-looking countries that embrace freedom and liberty need to think very seriously about what impact the Chinese Communist Party, either directly or through companies subject to its jurisdiction, might have on their security and that of the consumers.
And look, this doesn't just relate to telecom policy. You literally have Chinese communist-controlled corporate entities selling trains that go underneath all of our major cities. I mean, there's a lot of questions here about what we turn to for our infrastructure. And it leads to the next question, which is, when it comes to 5G, China and America might be looking at very similar technologies. Because we're innovative, because we have great places like Silicon Valley and Boston and other centers of innovation, are there new ways to think about 5G and the next iteration of 5G? We read about things like O-RAN. Please explain to our community, what are we looking at in terms of what's possible to make it even better and quicker?
Great question. And I know thus far I've painted a little bit of a bear case for 5G, why China has some advantages. But here's the bull case for America. We, number one, have a huge amount of spectrum, thanks to the SEC's efforts, that is going into the marketplace. And that's going to enable wireless companies, big and small, to be able to use to provide 5G. Second of all, we've taken a lot of steps to streamline wireless infrastructure, those small cells that I've talked about, to give it more certainty. But in particular, one of the things that we've been promoting is the open or virtual radio access network technology, or O-RAN, as you put it. So O-RAN, in a nutshell, can be conceived of as a way of putting software in charge of the networks rather than hardware. Instead of having towers and physical infrastructure that you can see that runs each of these cell sites, instead you would have a software-based platform that could be able to manage that network a little more efficiently and much more cheaply. And there are two good things about this in particular. Number one, it's much more efficient to do, which is critical. We're looking at wireless companies that don't have billions upon billions of dollars to spend just on this equipment itself, the hardware itself. But number two, it's also more secure, ironically, because it's open. When you have an open platform like this, it's essentially a software platform, then both the wireless operator and consumers can see where the vulnerabilities are, where the hacking attempts might be coming from, and they can patch those vulnerabilities very quickly. Compared to now, where, for example, if Huawei sells you all of the hardware that you need for your wireless network, you're essentially handing the keys over to them and saying, we trust you, Huawei, to guard against some of these vulnerabilities. And that's just not something that we think is a viable solution going forward. I will say the other good advantage of this software-based approach, O-RAN, is that many of these companies are based in the United States. You might not have heard of them, companies like Altiostar and Parallel Wireless and Mavenir, but these are American innovators who are really at the forefront of innovation. There are other companies in trusted countries as well. Rakuten in Japan, for example, that I've had a chance to meet with, they're doing really innovative things in this space. And so from a geopolitical perspective as well, these are companies that are located in places that we think are much more secure, much more trustworthy as opposed to Huawei and ZTE.
So we started this conversation talking about 5G. Punctuate it for people who are watching us. Why is it so critical that America gets 5G right? How will it impact people's lives if we get this done right under your leadership?
Well, I think the best analogy would be to 4G. America was the first mover when it came to 4G LTE, and the results speak for themselves. We had over $1 trillion of investment in wireless networks and applications. America became the mobile app economy, and it drove that across the entire world. When I became into office in 2012, America had only 4% of the world's population, but 50% of the world's LTE connections. As a result of that, a huge amount of economic growth and job creation happened in the United States. 5G is going to be significantly bigger than 4G. The speeds are 100 times faster, perhaps even more than that. The latency, which is the responsiveness of the network, is significantly lower, so you get a much quicker response on your device. And it's going to transform entire industries. Connected cars, for example, and telemedicine, precision agriculture, and gaming. All of these things are going to rely on 5G. And in addition to that, 5G could be a way of solving the digital divide in parts of the country where it is just too uneconomical to lay a fiber line and the like. So we see that 5G is going to be very transformative. And that's part of the reason why we're pushing ahead so hard, is because we want to claim those benefits for ourselves. And one of the things that people have to remember in this country, we've long had an expectation that America is always going to be on top. That's not necessarily the case. Talent is fickle. Capital is fickle. Innovation is going to flow to whatever country or whatever region makes it a priority to open the doors to that kind of innovation. If that's the United States, fantastic. We'll be able to claim those benefits. But if it's not, if China, for example, seizes the first advantage, then over time, over decades potentially, they are going to be the ones determining how this new internet economy develops. They're going to be the ones getting all of these great new startups, all of the new Silicon Valleys of the world, and all the Googles and whatnot. We don't want that to happen. And so both from a consumer perspective and from the perspective of a country, we need to make sure that America leads the way. And so long as I draw breath at the FCC, you've got my word that that's the ethos that I'm going to bring to the job.
Well, they've accused you of breaking the internet. I've been on my phone all morning. It's working pretty well, Ajit. And we know that if we don't get the 5G race, if we're not leading the 5G race, it's like putting a close sign on America for business. And the other thing, I think, I want to see if Mrs. Pai and Mr. Schlapp also agree on the fact that as much as we love the fact that we have these phones and laptops and everything else, Mr. Schlapp would like to get the Schlapp children back in school. Does Mrs. Pai agree with that?
Yeah, we've become erstwhile homeschoolers the last several months, and it's been a challenge, I've got to say. And the first week I was joking to my wife. We thought, oh, they'll be learning calculus by the end of the second week, and now it's just get through the day, survive. So I have definite respect for those educators out there who handle 30 unruly kids in a setting like that. It's a challenge, and hopefully our kids are going to be up to it this fall too.
Yeah, well, I think that would make for a lot of family harmony over at the Schlapp residence, and we really do appreciate. You've been very bold as the chairman of the FCC. This hasn't been a time when you've kind of laid down and done careful things. You've done really remarkable things, and the commission as a whole. And I think the president's approach to China, understanding not that we want to be at war with them, but that we understand that they're an adversary on these basic questions. And we no longer have to give in to what they need to grow their economy because we have this attitude that America could never lose any of these fights. We actually can. We can be weakened by what the policies that come out of the communist government in China. And we're just appreciative that President Trump put you in charge of the FCC, because nothing is actually more important than the space of how the digital economy works.
Well, thank you so much. I can't say enough how much I appreciate the support and the kind words about the last 3 years. We've definitely taken some swings, and that's because we want to make sure that America has a fighter's chance in this fight to make sure that we succeed, that we have innovation and investment. And I can't underscore enough how important it is for people not to become complacent. As I said, those of us of a certain age, I know you're only 29, Matt.
I'm old.
For me,
yeah.
No, but for me, I grew up in a time when, even though there were hiccups in the road, America was always on that upward trajectory. And that doesn't happen by accident. It only happens with leadership. And that means you've got to make some tough choices.
That's right.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I've been so aggressive on 5G, closing the digital divide, and some of these other initiatives, because we don't have time to sit on our laurels and think about how great things were over the past several decades for America. We've got to think about how great things need to be for our kids in the future decades, and that's not going to happen unless we make the right choices right now.
Ajit Pai, Chairman of the FCC, thanks for being with us on CPAC Live, and thanks for all the work you're doing.
Pleasure. Thank you.